Let us listen to the Spirit as we read these words from Philippians. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say, rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to everyone. The Lord is near. Do not worry about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, beloved, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. Keep on doing the things that you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, and the God of peace will be with you. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Pray with me. Open our ears, O God, to the preaching of your gracious and loving word, that we may be made gracious and loving people. Amen. I expect that of all the words that have been written about the Christian faith, and there have been plenty of them written about the Christian faith, but I expect of all the words that have been written about the Christian faith, perhaps the most meaningful, perhaps the most effective words have been the words of the hymns that we sing. I hope when we sing a hymn in worship that you pay close attention to the words, because I want you to know that we pick those hymns with a great deal of care. When the hymns are picked, we don't just pick any old hymn that comes into our mind. We don't just pick a hymn that we'd like to sing. We look at the words. We always look at the tunes, of course, and ask the question, is it singable? But we look at the words and try to choose hymns with words that will set the theme and carry the theme that we're working for in our morning worship. Surely you have noticed that there is always a theme to our morning worship. And we don't just sing any old thing. We sing something that goes along and usually carries the theme for us. And if we listen closely to the words of the hymn, it will help us to be clear about what it is we're talking about when we are going through our worship service. That is true because most of the time there is a story behind the writing of a hymn. And knowing that story and listening to the story, thinking of that story when we're singing those words, can make it so that our hymns have the power to inspire, to educate, and to motivate us in the living of the Christian life. Such has been the case with the hymn that I have sung off and on throughout my life as a Christian. I first was introduced to this hymn and first sang this hymn when I was in my early teens, probably only 13 or 14, and was attending Cairo camp near Red Lodge, Montana. The song leader in that camp, Christy, was Loretta McQuarrie. Christy's minister's wife at the time when both Christy and I lived in Billings. Loretta McQuarrie was what seemed to me, as Janice said about the women in her Georgia church, seemed to me to be ancient. I've realized that she was probably in her young 50s at the time, but she seemed to us junior high kids, to be ancient because she was a gentle and gracious lady. And it always seemed to me that she was just a little out of her realm, running around with us rambunctious junior high kids. But what she wanted to do for us, and the reason she was there in that camp, was that she wanted to introduce us to the joy and the meaning of Christian music. And for me, at least, and I suspect for Christy as well, that she was able to do that. The hymn of which I'm talking about, the hymn to which she introduced us rambunctious junior high kids, was a hymn entitled, "I Would Be True." Do you know that hymn? We're going to sing it in a little while in the service of worship. I would be true. I didn't know it then, but that hymn was by a man named Howard Arnold Walter, who had just graduated from Princeton University and who had accepted a teaching assignment for a year at a school in Japan. This was a long time ago, a long time before Japan had become the modern nation that it is now. He had gone as soon as he graduated from Princeton to spend this year in Japan teaching in a school there. He went all by himself, leaving his family and fiancé and all of that behind, and he was lonely there in Japan. When spring break came around, he had met another American boy, and they decided that they were going to spend their spring break on a walking tour of Japan. They didn't have the money for any transportation. They didn't have the money for hotels and that kind of thing, so they just rolled up their bedroll and started off on a walking tour of Japan. They got up there somewhere north of Tokyo and found themselves in dire need of a bath, a better night's sleep than they'd had just sleeping on the ground. So they put their pennies together and were able to rent a hotel room for each of them for one night. To their amazement, while they were up there and had rented that hotel room, the hotel in that part of Japan was in the habit of offering to their male customers geisha girls with whom they could spend the night. Now, Howard and his friend had been a long time away from home. They were lonely and in need of company. And they discovered that the opportunity to have a geisha girl, to spend the night with a lovely Japanese girl, proved to be for them a very powerful temptation. But they did not give in simply to that temptation. They began to struggle with the temptation, and Howard Walter says that in his struggle with that temptation, he suddenly had a vision. There came to him a vision of that lovely young woman who was his fiancée, who was waiting for him back there in New York City. There came to him as well a vision of his mother, whom he knew prayed for him every evening before she went to bed. There came to him a vision of the church in which he had grown up, a church that trusted him and believed in him and was proud of the work he was doing there in Japan. And as he had those visions, his temptation was conquered as he wrote these words: I would be true, for there are those who trust me. I would be pure, for there are those who care. I would be brave, for there is much to suffer. I would be strong, for there is much to bear. And he says that in the writing of those words, he found the power to overcome that temptation. When his year in Japan ended, he went back to New York City and married that girl who was waiting for him, the girl of his dreams. And together they went to India and spent the rest of their life in India as educational missionaries. I don't know for sure. I really don't know for sure. But I rather suspect that in his struggle with that temptation, Howard Walter had been reading the text that Rod read for us this morning from the book of Philippians. And while I don't know that for sure, I do know this for sure. When Howard Walter wrote that hymn, he concluded it with a line that gives us a pattern for living according to that text that was read for us this morning. A line that gives us a pattern for Christian living. Do you remember how that hymn ends? It ends with this line: I would look up and laugh and love and lift. I would look up and laugh and love and lift. Laughing, you know, is an essential part of the Christian life as Jesus lived it. I don't know about you, but I always think of Jesus as a person who did a lot of laughing and a lot of smiling. I think Jesus was able to laugh about a great deal of life. And that's one of the things that drew people to him, was his ability to look at life and laugh in a time when life was a very difficult thing for almost everybody. We get something of a picture of the sense of humor that Jesus had about life in some of the parables that he told us. I think some of those parables were really intended to make us laugh. I think, for instance, of that parable that he told about the woman who lost a coin that was worth approximately a nickel, maybe a little less than a nickel. You remember that story? How she spent the whole day looking for that coin that was worth less than a nickel. Can you see her? Digging down in the cushions of the couch, down on her hands and looking under the table, rifling through drawers, going through the pockets of her clothes that were in the laundry. And when she found that nickel, she called her friends and neighbors together and threw a party. And the party cost a good deal more than their nickels that she had found. There's a hint of humor in that story that Jesus told about the fortunate slave whose master thought highly enough of him that when the master was getting ready to go off on a trip, he entrusted that slave with a considerable sum of money, entrusted him to take that money and care for it for him and make more money with it, I presume, is what he expected. But as Jesus tells the story, do you remember that slave was so afraid of his master, so fearful, that he didn't invest it, too much risk in investing it. He didn't even put it in the bank where it could make a little interest. It was anything like today, not much interest, but a little bit of interest. He dug a hole, put the money in there and covered it up with dirt, and then did not understand why his master was not very happy when he came home and found his money stuck in a hole in the ground. And I can almost see the twinkle in Jesus' eye on that occasion when Peter and some of the other disciples were worrying about where they were going to get the money to pay a tax that the Roman government was assessing on them. And Jesus looks at Simon Peter with that glint in his of humor in his eye and says, "Hey Peter, remember that fish you caught this morning?" "Yeah." "Well, go over there and look in its mouth." And Peter pries open the fish's mouth, and there in the mouth of the fish is a coin that's just the right amount to pay the taxes. It's almost enough to make me take up fishing. Almost, but not quite. Not quite. It's an essential thing, this matter of learning to laugh at life. Learning to laugh at life doesn't mean that we have to become loudmouth, back-slapping comedians who never take anything seriously. It means instead that we learn to look at life and see the impermanence of the situations that cause us trouble in life. It means learning to look at life and see the folly and be able to laugh at the folly of so much of our human behavior. I suppose that it is something like the experience I had with my daughter when she was 6 or 7 years of age. We were living in Montana at the time, and the Christmas season was coming upon us. And we went out one day with another family from the church and their children. We went out to the woods in Montana, and our mission was to cut down a Christmas tree for the church, which we did, and it was so tall we had to cut the top off. At any rate, we cut trees for our home as well. They cut one for their home and we for ours. And out there in the woods, that tree looked so magnificent. It just looked wonderful, and we were so excited about the tree we were going to have in our home until we got it home and put it in it, wrestled it, into the tree stand and brought it into the house. And it was the awfulest looking mess you ever saw. There were holes in every side. Didn't make any difference to which direction we turned it. It just didn't look very good. And there were branches that were, well, you know how it goes. And I was griping and grumbling as we turned that tree this direction and then the other and tried to make it stand up. And finally, my daughter, who was filled with the joy of Christmas, had had enough of my grumbling and said to me, "Now look, Dad, you are just going to have to look on the happy side of this tree." I would look up and laugh and love and lift. And I suppose that Howard Walter put laughter first in that formula because he understood that if we can learn to laugh at life, we'll be much better at being loving in life. Maybe if we can learn to be cheerful, to face life with a cheerful attitude, then we can become a channel through which the love of God comes to the parched places of the world. That's what Christian love is intended to do. Christian love is intended to water those dry and parched places of the world so that they come to life. We get a picture of what can happen when we become loving people. If we remember the experience of the famous Helen Keller and what happened to her when a woman by the name of Annie Sullivan came into her life with love in her fingers. Helen Keller says that when that woman came into her life with love in her fingers, Helen's life turned from darkness to light. Listen to the words of Helen Keller's testimony. She says, "Once I knew only the depth where no hope was, and darkness lay on the face of all things. Then love came and set my soul free. My life was without past or future, and death was a consummation devoutly to be desired. But a little word from the fingers of another fell into my hands that clutched at emptiness, and my heart leaped up with the rapture of living." Not everybody that we encounter in life is in quite as desperate a state as Helen Keller was. But you may be sure that there is not one soul in this sanctuary this morning, that there is not one resident in this neighborhood that surrounds us, that there is not one citizen of the world that does not have some parched and dry place that can only come to life when we become a channel that allows the river of God's love to flow into those places. That's what Christian love is intended to do. It's intended to make us into a channel of the loving God so that somebody else's life leaps up with the rapture of living. There's one more piece to the formula that Howard Walter gives us. I would look up and laugh and love and lift. I wondered what Howard Walter had in mind when he used that word lift. I wonder what he was hoping that word would cause us to do. Maybe it was something like the sign that I have seen in front of a business out on Wheaton Way out there in East Bremerton that says, in every encounter that we have with someone else, we either filling their life with energy or we are draining their life of energy. I think it's the best sign I've seen anywhere in a long time. But that little saying on that sign and those words of Howard Walter remind me of an incident that was reported by a columnist in the Dallas, Texas Morning News some years ago. In her column, she tells the story of a little girl, I don't know how old, maybe 8, 9 years of age. A little girl who comes into the drugstore in her neighborhood carrying her piggy bank. And she dumps out all the money from her piggy bank on the counter and says to the clerk, "I want to buy a miracle." The clerk has been working too long, is a little cynical, and with a smirk says to her, "We don't have very many of those laying around." But what kind of miracle did you have in mind? The little girl tells the clerk about her little brother, Charlie, who is terribly, terribly sick at home. They've had the family doctor come. The doctor has done everything he can do and says there isn't any more he can do. And the only person he says he knows who can help this little boy, or who might be able to do something to help him, is a famous Dallas specialist by the name of Dr. Abernathy. But this family doesn't have any health insurance. And they know what specialists like Dr. Abernathy cost. And they know that there is no way they can afford it. And the mother says to the family, we can't have him. We can't afford him. And it's just going to take a miracle to make Charlie well. And so this little girl, who feels so helpless, does the only thing she knows to do. She goes to the drugstore with her piggy bank. She goes to the drugstore because she remembers how sometimes they're able to get medicine there that makes sick people well. And says to the druggist, and says to the clerk there, I want to buy a miracle. Down the counter, there is a man standing talking to the druggist. And he has overheard what the little girl says. And he makes his way down to where she is and puts his hand on her shoulder and says to her, honey, I want you to take me to your home because I am Dr. Abernathy, and maybe with God's help we can get you that miracle. That's it, isn't it? I would look up and laugh and love and lift. I would look up and laugh and love and lift. Will you pray with me? Lord, in the quiet of this morning hour, we come to you for wisdom, peace, and power, asking that we may view the world today through love-filled eyes. Amen.